The blame game certainly started following this fire. Some politicians are saying that NGOs like the Socio-Economic Rights Institute are to blame for litigation to stop the evictions. Some are saying if the evictions were not stopped, we wouldn't be here. But let's talk about that now. With the neglecting of shelters and not dealing with abandoned buildings, let's bring in the Institute's senior attorney, Nkosanathi Sithole, joining us this morning. Nkosanathi, hello to you. And Seri not getting a lot of love from politicians. Are you to blame? Some are suggesting you are.
Not at all, not at all. First of all, hi Gareth, and hi to your viewers as well. Of course, there is not to blame, and no other NGOs dealing with the work that we do, which is to enforce constitutional rights, especially for the poor and marginalized. The city has to take accountability for what it has failed to do, especially in circumstances where such a disaster happened in his property.
I want us just to add a little bit of context here, if we can. There was an involvement from the Socio-Economic Rights Institute for this building in particular, if I have this right, and this is why I'm asking, please, you must correct me if I've got this wrong, that there was an involvement for the temporary placement of 2 clients. There was a fire back in September 2014. So what was the involvement there, and when did that come to an end?
So we represented the occupiers who lived in a building somewhere in Commissioner Street. Their building burned down much like this one. And of course, as you know, in situations like this, where a disaster happens, the emergency housing code states that the municipality should then make sure that the displacees as a result of a natural disaster must be given alternative accommodation whilst the relevant authorities deal with that property and so on. Now, we had a situation where the women who could not find alternative accommodation whilst we're still dealing with an issue of forcing the city to provide such alternative accommodation. And the city then proposed that there is a shelter where they can house these 2 women because they had little children. And that is where we had a connection with this property to house those women temporarily. But of course, they couldn't be housed there for long because remember, that was a shelter for abused victim of gender-based violence and femicide and other forms of abuse. So quite different from what those 2 women were suffering. They were just homeless because their property had burned down.
Yeah. Part of the criticism leveled against your organization, Nkosanathi, is that the city does try and remove the illegal tenants, the undocumented foreigners, etc., and then you run to court as the Socio-Economic Rights Institute. You run to court to block that, and that is why the city isn't able to do their job. That's part of the contestation here. What's your reaction to them saying you not letting them do what they need to do?
Now let's take that into perspective. First of all, we live in a democratic country that is governed by the Constitution, and the Constitution, in particular Section 26(3) of the Constitution, says that people cannot be evicted or have their homes demolished without an order of court. Now, that means that when you just summarily evict people from their homes, that is in fact unlawful and unconstitutional. That section of the Constitution goes on to say that no law may permit arbitrary evictions. Now, if they then, if the state or the municipality suggests that in order to fix a problem of not complying with their constitutional obligation by summarily evicting people, then that is justified. That is not. And that is where organizations like Seri then come in. When such people who are being then summarily evicted from their homes come to us for assistance, we then are obliged to assist them in order to enforce their constitutional rights. Because unlike people who with deep pockets who can afford private lawyers, many South Africans are poor and cannot afford private lawyers, and that is why Seri, as a law clinic, is in a picture to assist those people free of charge. Now, it is not to say that we litigate against the city in order to stop it from doing right. No, we litigate against the city because we have been instructed by people whose rights have been violated, and we litigate on their behalf in order to enforce those constitutional rights and to request the city to do what is lawful.
Let me ask you this very quickly, Nkosanathi, as I start saying goodbye to you. Last question. How many litigation cases are you dealing with that are similar to this? It's not the litigation against the city, as you say, but it's the litigation against their violation of their rights. How many are you dealing with?
I'll tell you, it's a lot. It's a lot. And if I can put this into perspective, in 2014, actually, the city itself brought an application, which is now known as a stay application, where it halted all the evictions that were in court in the inner city, others brought by private property owners and others brought by even the state itself, to say that it wants some time to be able to provide alternative accommodation and also to understand what form of accommodation is required for the city to be able to be constitutionally compliant. Up until this day, the city has failed to provide those alternative accommodation. Since the matter of Blue Moonlight around 2012, I tell you, only 10 such temporary alternative accommodation have been provided, and that is over 10 years. Now it is surprising when the city comes and say we actually have no alternative accommodation to house even these people, because the question that is not even asked today, whilst we're busy dealing with this catastrophe, is where are these displacees now, victims of the fire, going to be housed? Because as I understand, they slept on the street. Where, what assistance is going to be given to the families of the deceased people in order to identify the bodies and to assist them to bury their loved ones? Because these are poor people. Yeah. Instead, they've been sent to pillar to post. They can't even identify their loved ones. And meanwhile, the city is playing a blame game.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's going to continue as well. Nkosanathi, thank you. I'm going to leave it there for now. I think you painted a very good picture of it. Still comes down to this: if you have people forcibly removed, even with court orders, some would argue that these people aren't moving into the buildings to break the law. They're moving in there because they have nowhere else to go. Where does the basic human rights, where does the constitutionality come in? And this is why it is such a complicated story. But I wanted to get the senior attorney joining us this morning from one of the organizations that has been mentioned, which is why I was only right to get them on, from the Socio-Economic Rights Institute. Many critics coming in, sort of attacking them, saying that they're blocking the evictions of illegal immigrants and blocking the evictions of those in this building, which is why we have this problem. But Nkosanathi Sithole giving us their view on this. He's a senior attorney for them.